After about 10 years of only using Macs, I decided to build a PC. I built this for a few reasons. I wanted more freedom and power when it comes to gaming. I wanted a computer that can game and stream at the same time with high quality settings. And I love building things and tinkering. Pretty soon I realized I wouldn't be happy unless I basically got the best components I could, cost be damned. In this video I'll show you how I built this extreme overkill PC. First step, I got to know the case. Figured out how to open the glass panel, and then realized it was going to give me problems if I was going to build on this case, so I'd have to figure out a way to take it completely off. So in this case, to take off the glass panel completely, you need to find the screws on the back of the case and unscrew those. And then be careful because the hinges might fall off like they did for me, and you'll have to go searching inside your case for a while. Okay, moving on to taking off the back panel. Just pretty easy. There are just 2 thumb screws on the back here, and you can pull it right off. By the way, this case is a Phanteks Enthoo Luxe tempered glass. It's an ATX full tower case because I needed a full tower case for the motherboard I picked, which is freaking huge. Didn't realize until after I bought it. Next, I started trying to free up all the space I could in the case to make it easier to work on. So I started with taking out the empty drive bay holders, or whatever those things are called. Here I'm going a step further and I'm trying to pull out the cages. There are just a couple thumb screws that you need to unscrew, but they're a little tough, so I had to use a screwdriver myself. Next was time to unbox the motherboard. As you can see, I got an MSI X99 chipset, GODLIKE gaming carbon. Basically the craziest motherboard I could find. This motherboard can basically support all the crazy things I would ever want. You know, multiple graphics cards and SLI. Tons of RAM, it's got built-in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and lots of good USB 3 ports and so on and so on. Plus it looks pretty cool with that carbon, and it should do well for overclocking. And now it's time for the unboxing of the processor. Anyway, as you can see, I chose to go with Intel, the Core i7-6950x, because basically it kicks all other processors' asses, even though it's quite pricey. The AMD Ryzen came out right before I started this build, so I was considering the 1800X for a while. But with all the problems that everyone was having, and with motherboards not supporting anything yet, and with the chip not supporting many brands of RAM, and it just seemed like a lot of problems for, I mean, I guess it would be a big discount, but I didn't want to deal with any of those problems. And this chip, the 6950X, kicks the 1800X's ass in every way, so I would not have been happy with the slower processor. So then it was time to consider the 7700K versus this chip, because the 7700 has better single core scores and processing, which could be better in some games. But I figured since I would be streaming and video editing and doing many things at once, the superior 10-core performance of the 6950X would just be a better chip for me. Wow, isn't that pretty? I realized that since I built this, Intel has announced their new line of chips, but those are going to have their own problems versus the AMD's coming up, like the Threadripper, and this is not the time and place to get into that whole controversy. So we'll leave it at, I bought the best chip that I could at the time, and I'm still pretty happy about it. So here I'm about to install a CPU. There's the little triangle in the one corner of the chip that you line up to the little triangle on the motherboard slot. Let's zoom in for a sec. So you basically just place it in with the little triangles lined up like that. Give it a little jiggle to make sure it's in there right. And then use the hooks to strap it down again. And the plastic plate will pretty much pop off. It's still sitting there, you can pop it off yourself. Alright, next is unboxing the RAM. I ended up going with two 16 gig sticks of DDR4 3466 RAM. This particular set came with a fan that actually had a couple different color covers. The RAM is red, which was not ideal for my build, but oh well, you get what you can, right? And here we go, installing the RAM. I read the manual to figure out which slots I should put it in to take advantage of dual channel RAM at least. I know if I had 4 sticks I could do quad channel, which would be a bit faster, but I figured I might want to buy 2 more 16 gig sticks in the future, so those are open for now and I'm only using dual channel. RAM is easy to install, you basically just push it in until it clicks, and you can see the side clips pop up into position again. Next we unbox the power supply. I went with a pretty crazy overboard, 1000 watt rated, platinum certified EVGA SuperNOVA P2. It comes with a set of somewhat nice black cables, but I bought a cable kit because I wanted white instead. My case came with a power supply cover, so I had to remove that before installing the power supply. All it took was unscrewing a few screws on the back side of the case. And now it's time to install the PSU and screw it down. I'm just installing the power supply alone right now without connecting any power cables. I'll save that for the end when I've got all the hardware installed and all the cables there and I can do it all at once. And of course check to see if the power supply cover will fit back over it. Which luckily it does. Here I'm unboxing the CPU cooler and radiator. It's a closed loop water cooled system that comes in an all-in-one package. It's the NZXT Kraken X61. Comes with a dual fan radiator. And here I'm just kind of trying to figure out how it's all going to fit in. So by now I figured out that all I have to do is install these spacer screws and it should be okay. I hoped at the time at least. But it worked out, so there you go. So next I was test fitting the motherboard into the case, trying to make sure all the screws lined up and that the back panel would fit. Here you can vaguely see that I'm checking the screws are lining up. And here comes my epic camera fail. Whoops. Unpacking the back I/O panel now. Figuring out if it's gonna fit the slot, but I need to take out the motherboard to put it in from the inside. You just push it in and it snaps in pretty easy. And now I gotta put the motherboard down to see if it'll fit in. And luckily it fits. So now it's time to actually screw down the motherboard. The case came with a bunch of screws, so we gotta pick out the right ones, those right there, and screw down the motherboard where all the holes are. So let's speed that up. And now let's check the backside and see if everything looks okay there. So my next challenge was installing the hard drive. It would go right there in that slot where it says MSI with those 3 holes right above it. The hard drive is an NVMe M.2 drive, which I had never even heard of before I started researching for this build. But it's a crazy fast hard drive, like faster than all the other solid state drives. And it goes into that crazy slot that I've never seen before. So this was a confusing time before I figured out how to mount it down. Here you can see the hard drive. It's freaking smaller than RAM and it's 1 terabyte big. The model I got was the Samsung 960 Pro 1 terabyte. So here I'm kind of sticking it in and like, how the heck does this get mounted down? So I checked the case hardware box and don't really find anything that would fit. So I'm pretty confused at the moment. Like, how am I going to install this crazy awesome hard drive? So here I try a few things and go through a few failures of trying to get this thing down. And finally, I realized that I need to move the screw base from that first hole over to the third hole so that I could actually secure the hard drive down. So again, this hardware was already installed on the motherboard, put in that first hole instead of the third one. So you just need to screw it out and move it. So now we have attempt number 2 in installing this hard drive. So I stick it in, bust out the screw, try to screw it down. Of course it wasn't that easy, and I had to set something on top of the hard drive to weigh it down and keep it in place while I tried to screw it in. But finally, success. Alright, my next step was going to install the CPU cooler radiator. So first was test fitting, pop off the top panel. That's an easy push click and pull off. And then I try to see if I can actually fit my radiator up there on the top of the case. Okay, it looked promising, so next was time to install the fans onto the radiator, which is pretty easy. You just screw them down with the supplied screws. You do want to make sure though that your fans are facing the right way for what you're trying to do. They'll blow air in the direction of the symbol on the front. Alright, so now that the fans were mounted to the radiator, it was time to actually mount the CPU cooler. It was a tight fit in my case, but it went well enough. So after the radiator was fitted, I had to mount down the CPU block onto the CPU. And there were just some easy thumb screws that went into those spacer mounts that we put on earlier. And now we go over to the radiator to see if the holes will line up to the case. And it looks like it'll work. So now we can start screwing the radiator onto the case. Here I realize the holes on the far left aren't gonna line up quite properly. So take a minute to think about what to do. Luckily the middle holes line up, so it'll keep it stable and it shouldn't be a problem. Next we get to unbox the video card. I went with the GeForce 1080 Ti. Went with the MSI model because it had pretty good performance and reviews and cooling. I didn't get a Titan just because the performance to value ratio is horrible. And I know I didn't follow that on the rest of my components, but since my monitor is only 1440p, I really couldn't find an excuse to go higher than the 1080 Ti, which can run on ultra settings in pretty much any game in 1440p. So the next step, of course, is installing a video card. So first I had to check the video card placement to see which back panel things I would have to remove and how many. I ended up having to remove 2 of the back plates, although I took off 3 because I didn't know exactly which ones it would need. So for the video card, all you need to do is pop open that clip right there and basically push it down until you hear the click. Of course, you gotta line it up properly. That wasn't in far enough. There you hear the click. And now you just need to screw it on to where the back plate was. And then making sure all the back plates are on properly, including the one I took off for no reason. And now that the video card's installed, we can go take a look at the back panel, make sure everything looks alright. Which it does, so good on us. Alright, now that we have basically everything installed, our next step is to hook up all the power. And since I don't want to use the stock black cables, I got this set of cables in white. So my first step here is going to be to install the motherboard power cable. Basically, you just push it in until it's in there good. Some of the slots will click. And here I go and plug it directly into the PSU, and then realize I've got ugly cables everywhere and I should probably do some cable management. So we'll head over to that next. Luckily this case has a lot of those nice rubber holes for cable management, so it was pretty easy to find ones close to the power supply and close to the port on the motherboard that I was using. Alright, looks much better. Next I'm installing the CPU power. Of course, this time I thought of cable management up front, so I didn't have to do it twice. Installing these cables is a little bit confusing, even though some of them are labeled. Like the easy ones were motherboard and CPU because it was labeled on the cable. But you probably want to look at your motherboard manual just to make sure you're plugging into the right places and you have enough power supplied to everything. A lot of the power cables aren't labeled as conveniently though, so for the GPU you gotta kind of figure out what'll fit. Here it's this weird thing where there are basically 3 columns and an extra column that's separated. So you basically plug in 4 plugs into these 2 slots. That little 2 prongs. And then the 6 prong next to it, times 2. Not to worry though on alignment, the 2 prong will only fit in a certain spot, so you can't really get it wrong. And here's how I ended up routing the GPU power cable. So now we've got more cables coming out of the CPU cooler. One of them hooks into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, so that'll control all the PWM and report temperatures back to the computer. And the rest of the cables will route to the back of the case so we can hook them up out of sight. These cables will get hooked up to the radiator fans and control everything. Now I'm hooking up the power for the fans using the SATA cable. This will be hooked up to the cable coming from the CPU cooler, and then the radiator fans will be hooked into the cable coming from the CPU cooler also. These fans will be variable speed based on the first fan you plug into the cable coming from the CPU cooler. The secondary fans will kind of be slaves and basically do the same thing that the first fan is doing, but the RPMs and stuff will only be read off the first fan. So now we need to do case fans. My case comes with a fan controller, so it's got its own CPU fan hookup there, and also it needs power. So here I plug the power into the SATA cable that's already there, and then I'll route the CPU pins over to the motherboard and plug it into a CPU fan header. And here I have the CPU fan plug routed through the back of the case, and just gotta plug it into the header on the motherboard right there. Now we have all the small things to hook up, all the case switches and stuff. So the first thing I'm gonna plug in here are the audio jacks on the case. So that'll go on the far left over there. And then I'll have to hook up the USB hookup for the CPU cooler. There's a USB 3 hookup for the case. And there's all those little power and reset switches and all that stuff. So here's a USB hookup from the CPU cooler. Here we have the USB 3 cable from the case. Okay, so a lot of the little case switches go into this adapter that comes with the motherboard, so you can plug it into the motherboard. And you basically just gotta line up what's labeled with what's labeled. There's a little triangle to indicate positive and negative from the case components, so you just make sure to line that up right with the adapter and you should be good to go. The triangle indicates the positive side. Left that part out, might be important. And then here you just plug it all into the motherboard where the motherboard manual tells you to. Pretty straightforward. Here we seem to have a power cable that I missed earlier, another SATA, so I just hooked it up to the daisy chain we had going. It's either from the fan controller, which I thought I hooked up already, or it's for the case LEDs. So either way, you need to plug in both of them to the same kind of thing, so it doesn't matter. So now that it looks like we're all done, we gotta reinstall the PSU cover, which is just a couple screws on the back, and then we should be good. So now we're gonna put the case covers back on. This is the back case. And here we move on to installing the front case cover again. Remember we took off those hinges, which we'll have to mount again on this side. And then after the hinge is on, we can do the other two thumb screws on the other end of the case. And we've got our PC built. Oh wait, I forgot things in life aren't that easy. There's empty power slots on the motherboard, and I finally figured out how to hook up power to them using this extra cable that breaks apart, which I didn't know broke apart, but I'll show you in a sec. So like I said, there's this extra CPU slot on the PSU and this extra CPU power cable, and I finally realized where or how I can hook it up to the motherboard. So we're going to plug into that CPU slot there, and then route it through the back of the case and plug it into the motherboard up top. And now for the magic trick that threw me off for so long. We're gonna just pull apart this cable. It splits in half pretty nicely. And now we're gonna plug in the 1/2 that fits, the 1/2 that we need, and the other half is just gonna be sitting in the back of the case doing nothing. And since you already saw how to do the rest, let's just jump into the end product. Sorry for the poor quality here. I need to figure out a better way of filming it. But I think it still looks pretty cool. What do you think? I've already started modding and slightly upgrading it since I built it, and I'll post videos of that soonish. And I'll also do some with benchmarks and performance and all that kind of stuff. So look out for more videos. Tell me what you think in the comments, and if you like the video, like and consider subscribing. I should have more content with PC building stuff and also gaming, and hope to see you again soon.